And Beck, we do have a quorum.
Okay, we got our tribe.
Mhm.
I'm looking. Why am I not seeing
Tracy?
Tracy.
Good morning.
Oh, there she is. Okay, thank you. Okay, it being 10 o'clock and a quorum being present, I will call to order the June 16th Peninsula RTPO meeting. And I thank all of you for joining us this morning. I will, as I do at the beginning of every meeting, I will introduce the panelists so anyone viewing our meeting will know who we all represent. And I do that looking at my screen, how people appear on my screen. So when I say your name, if you give some sort of indication, the viewing public will know. When I'm looking at my screen, the first person I see is Thera Black, the RTPO coordinator. Myself, I'm Beck Ashby, and I represent the city of Port Orchard. Ed Coviello is with Kitsap Transit and is our other RTPO coordinator. Michael Bateman is with the Public Works Department of the city of Paulsbo. Leslie Schneider is a city council person from Bainbridge Island. David Fort is the transportation person representing Kitsap County. Lindsay Schwarum Warren is a city council person in the city of Port Angeles. And Vicki Grover is with the city of Bremerton. Miranda Nash is with Jefferson Transit, and she is our fiscal agent. Ed Stern is a city council person in the city of Paulsbo. Gary Anderson is a port commissioner from the port of Bremerton. Tracy Parker represents the Squaxin tribe. Marty Allen represents the Snohomish tribe. Arnie Bacher is also with the port of Bremerton. Jeremy Jukes is with the Department of Transportation as our presenter today. Mike Frentz is a commissioner from Clallam County. Ben Thomas represents is a council person for Port Townsend, and Chris Hartman represents the port of Port Angeles. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah, I thought so. I don't know why. I just had a little brain freeze for a minute. And I see that John Clausen has joined us. John is the executive director of Kitsap Transit, and Kitsap Transit is our lead planning agency. Okay, with that, those are the introductions. I see that Randy Netherland is joining us. Happy he and John are here. I assume they have both had a 10 o'clock or a 9 o'clock meeting. That must have been now. And Wendy Clark Gexon has joined us. She represents Jamestown Sklallam tribe. And it appears as though Ashley Carley is with us also from DOT.
Right, she's the alternate for Olympic region.
Oh, she's the alternate
Yes.
for Olympic
Yes.
region. Oh, do I know that? I should.
We haven't had
Ashley.
much chance to yes, so
Okay.
she hasn't had much chance to sit in this role, and it's great to have her here today.
Oh, yes, appreciate that. Okay, with that, we will go down our agenda. And the first thing we'd like to do is approve the agenda. Is there a motion to approve our agenda?
Madam Chair, move for approval of the agenda as presented.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded to approve the agenda. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Okay, I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would vote against the motion to approve the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda stands approved as presented. And the other thing I would like to do is approve the consent calendar, and on it is the minutes from our April 21st meeting. Is there someone who would like to make that motion to approve the consent calendar? David Fort, would you like to make that motion?
So moved.
Thank you. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Leslie. It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent calendar, which consists of the minutes, the meeting summary from April 21st. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Hearing none, the consent calendar is approved unanimously as presented. I'm going to deviate just a little bit before we start our business items. Ed Stern from the city of Paulsbo has a commitment and he can't stay with us too long today. And he had, I believe, just a slight presentation and an invitation for all of us. Ed?
Thank you, Chair Aspie. So I just want to address what the pre-meeting conversation was when I dialed in, and that was Michael Bateman, one of our city engineers, talking about the Highway 305 roundabout. You're all familiar, the Connect Washington from 2016, 2018, and there are a series of roundabouts planned between the Seattle Ferry and Highway 3 that'll link to the Hood Canal and beyond. So the first, the roundabout is essentially completed and the public art was installed. I'll take it on two levels and I'll keep it brief, Beck. The roundabout was completed with over a 20% cost overrun. That probably doesn't come as a shock to most of us involved in infrastructure, certainly those that began infrastructure projects pre-pandemic, let alone supply chain. With that noted, I'd like to give a huge shout out to my colleagues on Bainbridge Island that are part of the 305 working group, which was the partnership of the two cities, transit, the county, and WashDOT to make all decisions rather than WashDOT top down. And that's worked very successfully. Shout out, Leslie, to my colleagues that started the conversation to reprioritize the limited funding still remaining. And then if I could ask my colleagues with Kitsap County to give a big shout out to Andy Nelson, who finished the case for appropriating and covering about a 1.1 million of the 20% overage. It was noted by Andy and Kitsap County that when the project was submitted, we also built the tunnel, which is both multimodal, pedestrian, and it's turned into an animal crossing under 305 too. And in those days, multimodal wasn't part of the project and could be included now under new criteria. So all of that led to the support of our colleagues, which obviously has pushback effect on the other roundabouts being planned between here and the Seattle Ferry Terminal. So thank you. The other component of the, and I noticed there was talk about the double turn lanes. They're called shift lanes. And as you're approaching, you can actually cross. The outer lane also has bus stops, interestingly, John Clausen. And I'll give an anecdote. When we were there this week installing the public art, which I'll end my remarks with, Chair, at first we thought people were honking and giving us the V for victory sign and thumbs up. And it turns out they were giving those of us with City of Paulsbo vests on unsolicited feedback on what they thought of the traffic pattern. So it wasn't thumbs up, it turns out, I learned rudely, but I appreciate the feedback from my constituents. So there's some confusion around shifting lanes, an outer lane with a bus stop, and hopefully people get used to it. I also want to say, my battery's running low, Chair, that, oh, did I cut myself off?
He'll hear you.
Okay. I also wanted, you see some pictures up there, and this is what I'll end on. The public art is very much a reapproachment between the city of Paulsbo and the Suquamish tribe, stemming from the breach of relationships, historic relationship after the tragic police involved shooting and killing at the July 3rd, 2019 July fireworks event. And we reoriented painfully the art to include a lot of tribal. You'll see the wall art from Kate Avacana, a recognized Suquamish tribe artist of some renown. She did the Mukilteo Ferry terminal art as well. And then the roundabout in the middle is a combination of both kind of Art Nouveau, Scandinavian, with embedded in the middle, the tribal canoe, which is symbolic of the Suquamish Nation. So that was championed and became an important gesture on the road to reconciliation. And so I just wanted to make my colleagues aware of some of the overlying purposes, both transportation, political, and community that are involved in that roundabout when you happen to catch it coming and going. I think that concludes my remarks, Chair, and I appreciate the time.
And you're all invited Saturday, 9:30 to the ribbon opening, the ribbon cutting.
Thank you. 9:30 on Saturday is the ribbon cutting.
That's right.
Thank you for the invitation and thank you for the presentation, Ed. That's great work and successful work. Thank you very much. Moving on down and thank everyone for allowing us to insert that so that Ed can complete his obligations for the day. Moving down our agenda, we have the approval of our UPWP for the next biennium. Thera, did you want to take this item?
Sure. This is the final draft of the version that you reviewed in April. This is your work plan for the next 2 years, the budget and the work that will be accomplished. The budget is unchanged from the current biennium that we're in. And as same sort of 4 components, primary focus in terms of discretionary activities. As we will discuss later, primary focus is on the development of a new regional transportation plan. What I need from you today is your approval of this by virtue of the resolution, the adopting resolution. Assuming your approval, we will finalize the details of this on our end, submit it to WashDOT, and it will go into effect on July 1st. So with that, be happy to answer any questions that you might have or talk about any aspect of the update of the updated UPWP. Otherwise, be looking for your action.
I will say what I would call people's attention to is under, is it section 4 or appendix A, whatever that is, where
Unfunded needs.
the unfunded needs. We have several items in there. We have zero money for that in the next biennium. If we get to any of those projects, excuse me, it will probably be from a different funding source. So just so you know that, because we usually have been able to do a couple of extraneous things, and that is not necessarily going to be available in this next biennium because of the work we're doing on the regional transportation plan. The other thing that I'm going to note, and we will talk about it also a little bit later down the agenda, is one of the important elements of the new RTP will be our GIS system. And the budget that we have coming up does not have money in it for additional hours for support for our GIS through the Association of Washington Cities Consortium for that. So those are the 2 things that are out there. They're both money related, but we do have enough money to complete our work and complete the RTP. So with that, is there, and I will also note to everyone, if you look at your packet, there is at the beginning of each element, there's a requested action. And so that's where you can find the motion that you would like to make. So is there someone who would like to make a motion to approve the UPWP and to authorize us to execute the associated agreements with the Department of Transportation?
So moved, Lindsay.
And is there a second?
I'll second, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Randy. Now, is there a discussion on the UPWP and our budget for the next couple of years? Okay, with that, it has been moved and seconded to approve our to approve resolution 02-2023, which adopts the 24-25 UPWP and authorizes the execution of the associated Washington State DOT funding agreement. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Hearing none, the motion stands approved with unanimous consent. So thank you very much. Moving on down the agenda, our next item is approval of the next biennium's lead planning agency agreement. And we're fortunate that Kitsap Transit has agreed to continue as our lead planning agent for the next 2 years. And we do this in conjunction or concurrently with the new UPWPs to keep everything on the same timeline. So Sarah, did you want to take this or?
Sure, sure. Actually, this will really be the intro for both of the next two items.
Okay.
To carry out the UPWP, PRTPO maintains two separate agreements to carry it out. One is a lead planning agency agreement with Kitsap Transit, and the second is a fiscal agent agreement with Jefferson Transit. For those who haven't been through this part of the process before, WashDOT recognizes Kitsap Transit as the lead planning agency, and so they're sort of on the hook for making sure that PRTPO accomplishes all of its requirements and fulfills all of its obligations. And then Jefferson Transit, just to keep things clean and separate, because of the unique structure of this, Jefferson Transit handles all the bookkeeping and the accounting functions with WashDOT. So, and that has worked really well over the last 4 years. And fortunately, both agencies have agreed to do this going forwards for the next biennium. And so the first of these action items is to approve the agreement between PRTPO and Kitsap Transit for lead planning agency services for state fiscal years 2024 and 2025, and authorize the chair to execute that agreement with Kitsap Transit.
Is there a motion or questions? Leslie, are you interested in making a motion?
I was just trying to find it.
Yeah.
So if somebody else wants to jump in.
Okay.
So moved.
Thank you, David. Yeah.
Was that you, David?
Yeah.
Is there a second?
Second, Lindsay.
Thank you. It has been moved and seconded to approve, to adopt resolution 03-2032, approving the agreement with Kitsap Transit for lead planning agency services for the next biennium. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved with unanimous consent. And again, our sincere appreciation, John, for the support we get from Kitsap Transit as our lead planning agency. Very much appreciated.
The second action item is to complete that same approval process for Jefferson Transit as the fiscal agent. So we would be looking for a motion to adopt resolution 04-2023, approving the agreement with Jefferson Transit Authority for fiscal agent services for state fiscal years 2024 and 2025.
So moved.
So moved. Second, Lindsay.
Thank you. Is there any discussion on Jefferson Transit remaining our fiscal agent? Hearing none, the motion to approve has been made and seconded to adopt resolution 04-2032, approving the agreement between the RPTO and Jefferson Transit. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Hearing none, the motion is approved with unanimous consent. And again, our sincere appreciation to Miranda and Jefferson Transit for filling this role for us. It's very critical. And as most of us know, when we started this, Jefferson Transit had a different financial person. It was Sarah. And we have gone through a transition at Jefferson Transit too, very seamlessly. Miranda has done a stellar job for us, and we appreciate that, and the support from Jefferson Transit in general. So thank you for your continued willingness to do this service for us. Thank you. Now we have the next agenda item, again, is an action item. And I will let Sarah explain this a little bit, but I'm going to just say something to start with. Back in, maybe it was February, we came to the board and we didn't have enough money. We did not feel to finish our work for the year. And we also wanted to renew our contract for our GIS system. The DOT had some funds available, so we applied for those funds and we were awarded those funds. And we have since executed and completed the contract for the GIS system. What Thera has found out over the course of time from when we were awarded that those funds is that there's not enough hours in the day or hours in the month to totally complete the work that we had intended to. So Thera, do you want to talk about our solution or how we came to that situation?
Sure. Well, how we came to that situation is when we calculated our budget deficit for the year, we were including also the first part of this calendar year, which we did not make up. But be that as it may, we end up with some funds left over, a few $1,000s that will not be spent by the end of June. And for a couple of reasons, we would like to avoid that situation. First being that if PRTPO asks for supplemental funding and doesn't spend it, it'll be hard to get supplemental funding again in the future. The second reason, though, is because we actually have something that we could use that funding for. And so the proposal that that we're bringing to you today, and this is sort of a pop-up thing because the money goes away at the end of June, or PRTPO can extend its GIS services contract. I had indicated in here 33 hours of additional service, so about a 30% increase from what we just acquired to get us through this next year and a half. It's actually 30 hours. It's the cost recovery stuff and compound. Anyways, so it ends up being 30 hours that we can afford with all the fees on top of it, and it just seems like a very good investment given what you are going into this next biennium with the RTP update. We're not sure where the funding will come from for another year of GIS services. So if we can grow this capacity for the current contract, I think you'll put it to very good use. So the request to the board is to approve that PRTPO acquire 30 hours of additional service credit through the GIS consortium. And happy to answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, we'll be looking for your direction on that, please.
Are there, Miranda?
Just to clarify, it says 33 hours.
Correct. And so that what I'm suggesting is that it should be 30 hours now that I've been able to find out what the admin cost would be, admin cost on admin cost. So it would be 30 hours actually. We were moving very, very fast, trying to pull this together. So apologies.
Yeah, Thera's landing the airplane right now. And, you know, the wind is rocking it and she's on the rudder and she's gonna, nice soft landing.
Stick that landing.
Yep.
So when we talked and improved our UPWP, we noted that we had no funds in there for the next biennium for any of the GIS services. So this would allow us to buy an additional or extend our current contract by 30 hours, which will again aid us in finishing the RTP and being able to keep it updated. So with that, we would entertain a motion to approve the RTPO's acquisition of 30 hours, extending our service contract by 30 hours. Again, the alternative to that is we will leave this money, should we say, on the table, and it would go back to DOT. And I believe there'd probably be some repercussions from that because we had asked for the money up front. So,
Madam Chair, this is Randy. I move for approval of the extended purchase of or extension of 30 hours worth of work to accomplish this and the budget that goes along with it.
thank you.
Leslie.
Thank you, Leslie. Is there any discussion on this? Okay, it has been moved and seconded that to approve the Peninsula RPTO's acquisition of 30 additional hours with our service contract through the GIS consortium. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? I will ask a second time. Is there anyone who would be voting against that motion? Hearing none, the motion passes with unanimous consent. We do appreciate that. We do appreciate that a great deal. It allows us to move forward. And I think it's a prudent way to utilize those funds. So now we're going down. We have a presentation from the Department of Transportation, and there I do not know Jeremy, so I will ask you to introduce him and introduce the presentation.
Sure, I will do that. So just board members, you know that we bring you presentations every so often from the state as they're working on their statewide plans. And that is what this is a part of. And so we are going to, over the next 30 minutes, we're going to hear from Jeremy Jukes, who's with WashDOT, and then also Adrian Dodana, who is a contractor to WashDOT, helping with communications on something called the Highway System Plan. And you probably last heard about this, actually probably none of you have heard about this before. You might have, previous board members might have heard about this back in the early 2000s. But this is a really important statewide plan that's being updated, and they're going to walk you through the update process. And I've been told that if we have any follow-up things that we need to deal with outside of this agenda item, that they can be available to dive deep on questions that you all might have if we can't get to it today. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Adrian, to you and Jeremy. Thank you.
Thanks, Sarah. I think Jeremy's going to kick us off with the presentation, and then I'll be available as well for questions and discussion. So I'll turn it over to Jeremy.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, you got the name right at the beginning here, Jeremy Jukes. Like if you had a lot of jukeboxes, you would have Jukes. Adrian, of course, is with me today, helping with some of the questions. And just kind of a quick note before we jump in, this has been a multi-year planning effort, and we're spending about 30 minutes. So appreciate the words there about the ability to follow up or dive deeper into any topics. Also, you're one of the first two presentations that we've done on this plan, and that means we don't actually have the material ready for you to take a look at and review. And so once that's out and available, you may have additional questions. We'll be happy to follow up with that as well. Is my screen sharing? You should see a starting image there. Okay, great. So I'm project manager for the Highway System Plan, and I just want to start out by saying this has really been a remarkable effort over several years, and it's really only been possible with input and coordination from folks around the state to make it happen. A couple things today. One, kind of providing that overview of what is the highway system plan, review some of the scenarios that we heard, some of what the feedback we got, and then share our draft 20-year funding recommendation for a resilient system that is sound, safe, and smart. And also, we'd want to touch in a little bit on what some of our next steps and timeline look like as well. So when we talk about the highway system, we're talking about interstates, US routes, and state routes across the state. While our office happens to staff this effort, we're conducting this work really on behalf of all of WashDOT, including your region representatives that you work with here more directly. And of course, connections to other types of transportation are also very key. The ferry system has a separate long-range plan that was updated a few years ago, and we're going to be talking about the road portion of the highway system and not necessarily the ferries part, because they are covered in another plan. We have also, I'll mention this as well, heard the needs for local agencies and transit agencies. Those, again, are not covered by this plan, but we have heard through our outreach the needs of those areas as well. So what is our direction on this? We've got some clear statutory direction here. This is essentially the first sentence of the RCW that talks about what the highway system plan is. So it's a 20-year plan that addresses programming and financial needs of the system to accomplish a wide variety of things, and all of them are important. We were also asked to ensure rigorous community engagement was part of this process to get the input of many different perspectives and to consider the needs of all highway users, not just those who drive cars. Like many planning processes, we started with a vision to kick us off. What you see on the screen really builds on the vision for all transportation that came from the Washington Transportation Plan. We started with that, and it was reviewed and tailored by our Highway System Plan Advisory and Steering Committees. And that really creates these aspirational statements that point the way forward for highways. I'm not going to dive real deep on this. Happy to follow up if there are questions. Went through a variety of steps on our way here. So really started working on this in earnest in 2020, looking at what needs were across the state, doing that assessment of needs. Identifying a range of scenarios to take a look at really took place in 2021. And we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail in another slide here. Narrowing the scenarios down for analysis and feedback was important. And then constructing the draft 20-year funding recommendation is where we're at now. And we'll be following up with the draft plan. So this will be our, we've gathered a lot of input over the last few years. This will be the first time we've come out and said, here's what we've done with all that input. And now we want to know what you think of our assessment of that. And we'll be chatting about that in the last bit here. And of course, once the plan goes out for draft, we'll be taking that input, incorporating it into the final plan and adopting it. Few of the steps that were touched on through here, lots of different lines of input here. So there was a set of work with the public directly through large-scale tools. We had a public survey that was designed to be scientifically valid and representative of residents in Washington State. We supplemented it with an opinion poll, and we held several virtual public meetings to get additional input and be able to chat with folks and about what the input that they were giving us. We also did a set of interviews, both with our advisory committee as well as internal to WashDOT, because we have a lot of folks here who work with the system daily, understand what the needs are from a perspective. And we followed up with a set of scenario workshops with technical experts across the state. We also had an approach to equity that we developed and followed that up with a set of workshops that were attempted during the pandemic, had a little bit of participation, and said that's not good enough. And we followed that up with some additional interviews to get more input from several populations of focus during this effort that have historically been underserved and overburdened. And that leads us to where we're at now with getting some feedback on the scenarios that were considered along the way, and then synthesizing that to what our draft recommendation looks like. This has also been a financially constrained plan. So we looked at what revenues might be available over the next 20 years for highways. There's starting with what was present when we started. So that was after Connecting Washington, but before Move Ahead Washington. That is our baseline for this effort. And after Move Ahead Washington passed, we kind of really moved into the space of looking at what is that ambitious but reasonable amount of new funding that might be available over the next 20 years. And so the bottom line you see there is that it would be an additional $40 billion of new revenue available for expenditures. So it's not our role to figure out where that funding comes from. There's other folks that look really deeply into that question, but we needed to do this level of effort to understand how much might be available to spend on all of the things that are important for keeping highways working. When we were looking at across the different programs, I'll touch on those in a second. We looked at the different policy goals across that are in statute, and we had a number of metrics that we looked at as well. And so the policy goals are in statute. The metrics were based off of available information that we could access and include in our planning process. This isn't the full comprehensive list of everything that could be considered associated with those policy goals, but it's the information we could take a look at. Again, this will be a deep dive on the nuts and bolts. We could definitely follow up on this if there's interest. When we did our outreach, we heard quite a bit about the different programs, and there's a whole lot involved in this. So whether we're talking about preservation of pavement, bridges, and all the other parts of the highway system, whether we're talking about maintenance, folks tended to think about those things together. And so we grouped them together as highway repair, and that's together. So in other words, whatever somebody thought of bridge preservation, you had a pretty good idea of what they thought about pavement preservation as well as maintenance long-term. There's also a lot of the signature projects that have been built either from mobility or economic vitality reasons, tend to be large expansion projects or new and bigger highways. The exact term isn't the point here. The idea is let's go in, let's do something bigger and something new. We also have this group in the middle, which are the safety and efficiency programs. These tend to be programmatic areas that aren't necessarily funded as a they tend to be funded kind of together of here's funds to implement safety, to reduce fatalities and serious injuries, or here's funding to specifically retrofit portions of the highway to meet current environmental standards, or here's funding for transportation operations or public transportation or active transportation. And so each of these is very different. And the reason they're grouped together is because people think about this group of things differently than they do the other two categories here. And we needed to do some kind of simplification to have a quick and useful conversation. We could spend hours and hours on any one of these. So I'll talk about what we heard on these sections a little bit. This was kind of the clearest picture of what folks were thinking about preservation. Preservation and maintenance is essential to keeping highways operating. It's how WashDOT replaces damaged guardrails, temporarily patches potholes, clears snow and ice in response to emergency road closures, as well as doing the long-term structural work on pavement, bridges, and other assets. So in the conversations across WashDOT regions in 2022, we found strong support for preserving roads at the lowest lifecycle cost to keep the system working and functional. That was kind of the resounding word that we got back. This level of policy support is almost unheard of from my experience. And it was a really strong message that we need to keep roads working. There were some minority viewpoints in this conversation, and I want to recognize those as well. There were some rumblings that, you know, maybe there's some roads WashDOT should look at not taking care of or turning back or giving to someone else. And so that is not necessarily rising to the level of a statewide issue, but there may be some locations where that conversation is very relevant and very deep. There's also a conversation of, what if WashDOT took care of roads better than just functional? What if we made them something better? And so maybe not necessarily kind of a like new condition, but something that someone might be able to say, yeah, we can be proud of that road. The other two categories here, so when we looked at expansion or safety and efficiency, that was a balancing act. These are changes to the system, improvements of some kind. So it's a wide range of tools available as well as a wide range of views. So investing in the expansion includes widening roads, expanding intersections, adding new interchanges, adding passing lanes, improving ramps. It includes many of the projects from the Connecting Washington, some of the Move Ahead Washington projects, as well as nickel and TPA funding packages from 2003 and 2005. And like we talked about, safety and efficiency is this catch-all category for programs outside of highway repair and capacity expansion. It includes programmatic safety improvements, environmental retrofits, and the other things on the list I mentioned on the previous slide. When we talked with folks in workshops across the state last year, the participants really looked at the outcomes of different mixes of funding and the performance across the different criteria. And when we tallied the results, you can see that there's a very clear middle to this conversation. There's some variation depending on the group we talked to and where they were and what their thoughts were. But really, there is a real middle to this conversation. There's also a distribution either side of that middle. Some folks are, the answer is expansion. What's the question? And other folks are saying, no, we really don't like cars. We want to look at anything else. But most folks were somewhere in the middle, but leaning towards safety and efficiency. So kind of recapping what we heard from the different bits of feedback here. Again, that very strong support for preservation and maintenance across all regions and groups, emphasizing strategies to increase safety and efficiency of the existing system while funding some highway expansion. And then from our equity work, really strong support for increasing travel options, improving housing access, creating economic opportunities for investments for overburdened and vulnerable communities. WashDOT took this input as well as several other factors. And so the recommendation that I'm going to show you on the next slide here, was really based off of a combination of the being responsive to public input, alignment with state, regional, local plans, consistency with federal direction, WashDOT's professional duty to steward the transportation system, as well as the legislative direction that we have. The final set of scenarios that were considered by the steering committee are shown on the screen here. So one, you see in black, there's no change. That's the budget as it existed in 2020 or 2021. You can see that there was funding for repair across the board, that was going to be taken care of. Safety and efficiency funding, a variation of a split of 2/3 for safety and efficiency and 1/3 to expansion, to none for expansion and more for safety and efficiency, and something in the middle there. All of these scenarios also, I'll mention, fully funded the court-ordered fish passage barrier removals. That was key. Those funds are not shown here. There's a couple other categories that will also be kept to the side. On the final recommendation, do a little kind of orientation on the slide that you can see on the top right. Those are the numbers based on accounting for Move Ahead Washington as well. So in black again is the baseline funding. And then we took that total amount available, took preservation and maintenance needs off the top, and then split whatever was left over into the additional categories based on that ratio of $2 to $1. Move Ahead Washington was passed while we were updating the plan and in parallel. And so that was, obviously we couldn't make recommendations before we could make recommendations. And so that was passed, and you can see that was accounted for here in the blue there, and then the different categories in green above. So consistent with the scenario that was preferred most during outreach, we're looking at to recommend that the safety and efficiency is funded at a ratio of $2 for safety and efficiency for every dollar in expansion, after any funds are with whatever funds are left over after preserving the system. So with fixing it first, that would cost an additional 17 billion over the next 20 years. We have gotten some indications that that number may be growing from when we did this analysis a few years ago. For prioritizing safety and efficiency, after factoring in new revenue from Move Ahead Washington, we'd be looking at investing an additional 5.4 billion over the next 20 years in the different strategies that improve safety and efficiency. In terms of economizing on expansion, and this will be every area of the state, our recommendation would invest 1.4 billion over the next 20 years to further those types of projects. And again, if you kind of do some careful counting on this, you'll notice these numbers do not add up to 42 billion because there are some investments that don't fall directly within these categories. And what would we get as a result from that? We'd be looking at a system that is sound, safe, and smart, that all bridges and highways are open and maintained. It's easy to agree with that number. It's another thing to, that idea, and it's another thing to invest the funding to make that happen. We'd be looking at adding additional places for folks to walk, bike, and roll, intersections that would have reduced injuries and death. Looking at something close to 8.9 billion saved in economic costs over 20 years as well. And a smart system with fewer gaps in transportation needs, more travel options, efficient systems, traveler information, a healthier environment, and equity, more equitable policy outcomes. And that's essentially where we're at this point, and I'll hand it over to Adrian.
Thanks, Jeremy. I think we'll first just see if there's any questions from the group. Anything that sort of you wanted to dig a little deeper into from the presentation. Looks like Beck, you have a question, or Lindsay maybe first and then Beck.
Right, I was just going to tell our folks if they want to use the raise the hand feature, then you can get them in order.
Great, thank you, Beck. So Lindsay, I saw your hand up first.
Hi, Lindsay Sherwin-Warren. I'm a Port Angel City Council member. We love complete streets, and we love the idea of all streets being safe for all users and providing access to the destinations people are going to. Here we're talking about highways, and I don't want us to confuse highways and streets because those are different things. And I hear a lot of emphasis about mobility and potential expansion. And I'm curious about how this analysis was done, looking at accessibility to the destinations people are going, and how do we not, I think it's an old book now, but How Cities Work, the idea that how we design transportation systems then drives land use patterns and creates sprawl. So how are we avoiding that in this plan?
The short version on this is that every type of funding needs more detailed planning than what we can do at the top level. So this is looking at how much funding should go to different purposes. And so there are some places that are looking to do some sort of expansion to accommodate their growth and make changes happen with that respect. And that, again, is a level of detail that the actual planning for that wouldn't be found in this plan. There's another level of detail. Our active transportation plan at WashDOT, for example, did a very deep analysis on, and more can be done here, but on what system gaps there were for those who walk, bike, and roll, and is the basis for WashDOT's implementation of complete streets in many ways, along with other plans that indicate other system gaps. And so we've heard a lot of different perspectives throughout the update on how many pieces of this would get done. and the needs of each individual area are going to be a little bit different as things grow and develop. And we'd be looking towards planning that happens at the city or regional level on how an area develops.
Thanks, Jeremy. Is that helpful, Lindsay?
I mean, yes and no. It's kind of a pass answer, and that's fine. I mean, I understand that. You know, we saw a schematic of WashDOT planning to do a complete street of Highway 101 through most of the connection between Port Angeles and Sequim. And that's just had me thinking about the kind of watering down of the complete streets concept and ethos. You know, I look at the picture of the bicyclist on the previous slide, and depending on the speed of that roadway, which it's, you know, depending on how you sign it, people are going to drive fast because it's really wide. A lot of people are not going to want to bike with their baby on that street or on that road. I'm not sure what it is. So I hope that we can, you know, keep the highways as highways, keep the streets as streets, and figure out how to not just create, I guess the word would be stroads for everything we have in Washington.
Thanks. Appreciate that comment and point. So I see a couple more hands up, so we'll move to Michael and then Leslie.
Hi guys, thanks for presenting this and taking some comments. Thinking about high level discussion, I have just two questions. One is there any discussion in there buried in the weeds about trying to improve WashDOT's ability to either require mitigation dollars or mitigation activities, development improvements of development as it happens, especially within communities at the local level. We struggle to require developments to improve highways, and I know you guys struggle as well. And it may take some legislative action to make it happen, but the ability to get the developers to contribute some funding to highways to make improvements that are needed for their impacts is limited for both of us and definitely needed. And then also small cities like us, and a lot of us here, and Lindsay especially, and others of us on this, we have highways that come through our small city that make a disproportionate impact to us. We're Poulsbo here, we're 12,000 people, but at Highway 305 and 307, we have 40,000 cars a day coming through town. Those are not us, right? And we're at a point where our level of service is not meeting WashDOT standards. Those cars are coming from Seattle and going to visit Lindsay and over at the beach, you know, as we want them to do. But those impacts, disproportionate impacts to the small communities, we can't make that up, you know, as a small city. So ideally, that would be part of an equity discussion at the high level, would be how to try to make some strides towards mitigating municipal Seattle areas impact on, you know, Port Angeles, Poulsbo, Concrete, the small cities heading out towards the east. So anyway, I know those don't really have great answers, but those are just things that are on our minds at the small cities.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm just going to jump right in, Adrian.
Please.
There's a couple of pieces to that, and I appreciate what you mentioned about the struggles in that. As you may know, for highways of statewide significance, WashDOT actually has no ability under certain development review practices. We are directly exempt from that consideration. And that would, as you mentioned, require legislative action to change. For one of the, I guess, parameters of this plan was to work within the existing rules and regulations and not look at changing them. And that was something that allowed us to do an update to this plan that has not been updated since 2007.
Right.
We did not look at trying to change the line there necessarily, but to say, here's what it looks like working within the lines we've got. The other side of that, of course, is, so what are we doing about that? we do still have standards for highways of statewide significance, and there is still some action under SEPA review that can happen. There was growing interest as we were developing this from basically every one of our regions, kind of a groundswell of, we need to revisit our level of service standards. It's been a few decades since those were first established, and I didn't cover it in this, but there is some future discussion about looking at updating those from the current standards under the Highway Capacity Manual to either something with a more holistic multimodal level of service of some kind, or a VMT based level of service of some kind. We didn't get to a level of detail to examine that in detail, but there's interest in going that direction.
Yeah, it kind of doesn't really matter exactly how you measure it when we know that things are way too congested at peak times, so it doesn't matter how you measure it, that you get the same result, right?
Yeah. Yeah, some of the interest too was, I mean, to be frank, speaking to some of what Lindsay brought up around, are we just considering the congestion levels, or do we also consider the quality and the level of traffic stress associated with having bicyclists and pedestrians close to that level and type of traffic? And as you noted, there are many highways that are main streets through cities.
Yeah. And we totally get that you had to limit your scope to actually make something happen. But it would be nice if in the result there's even a pointer towards, hey, in the future there's more work needed in these areas. It'd be great to have that included in the plan to drive future discussion on rather important topics.
I see we have a couple more hands up, and I know we're getting close to our time. So Jeremy, anything you wanted to mention just about sort of the kind of highways that go through the smaller cities, or just take that comment?
I think nothing additional, but yeah, appreciate the comment.
Yeah, it's something that we have heard, and definitely want to continue to keep track of those comments. So Leslie and then Wendy, and then I think we'll probably be out of time, but we'll see what Tara has to say about that. So Leslie.
Thank you. I mean, this might sound a little bit related, but so these high level recommendations for how to, parcel out the money for safety versus maintenance and expansion. So tomorrow there's going to be this ribbon cutting for in Poulsbo for the roundabout, and I'm on Bainbridge and I want to get there. I'm going to get there. So I'm kind of balancing, do I ride my bike or not? And that would be my preference. I've never ridden my bike across the bridge. And so I'm just kind of curious, sort of taking it out of the hypothetical, how might WashDOT look at sort of the safety factors going into that bridge, for multimodal and whatnot? Is there any plan for that in the next 20 years? How would it rank, with these guidelines?
Yeah, that is an excellent question. And ultimately, because we're working at the programmatic level instead of the project level, we don't get to that level of specifics in this plan. So what I can say at the programmatic level is the preservation of bridges and streets is doing the work to keep it functional. And I don't know if that particular bridge is up for replacement, but if it were, the funds would be twofold. One, to replace the kind of function as is, whatever that is, and then to be compliant with the complete streets requirements that are now part of statute. I don't know if Ashley has an answer offhand for the specifics on that bridge, but I can follow up and get back to Sarah on that.
Thanks, Jeremy. And then do we have time for Wendy's question? We'll go ahead and take it. Wendy?
Yeah.
Oh, You're cutting out for me. I don't know if that's the case for everyone. Wendy, do you mind typing your question in the chat for us?
Is that an address? Tell us about your plan.
Wendy, you're breaking up really bad.
Yeah, sorry, I couldn't understand the question. So if maybe we can follow up with Wendy after the presentation with her question, Thera.
Oh, yeah, and yes, we can. And I'm sorry, I just actually canceled the screen share. I'm sorry about that, Mia.
No worries. I
yeah.
think we're kind of at our time too. I don't want to go beyond what you had your agenda for us either. So one of the things we did want to get feedback on to just more is about the distribution of funds that are being recommended. And I recognize that was a lot here to digest for folks. So we'll follow up with a presentation, send it to Thera. And if you have thoughts about the funding distribution, if there are areas that you all support or align with in terms of the funding distribution being recommended, or don't support or align with, we want to hear those concerns or the areas that you agree with, or folks that in your constituency, share your support and concerns or comments and questions with us in the future too, after you have a chance to kind of think about it. And I think Wendy's question did end up coming up in the chat. So perhaps we can take that question and respond to it in a follow-up as well. So thank you. I'm gonna.
Adrian, that might have been me dumping a resource in about connecting land use planning and transportation planning and the difference between mobility and accessibility. Sorry.
I see that now, Lizzie. Thank you. So if Wendy does have a question, we'll take it later. And I'll take your comments in the chat too. So thanks, Lindsay.
Yeah, I will also say that was Wendy's attempt to communicate with us is a great example of the need for better broadband, because she is in a more remote area, and that's why she experiences that occasionally. So, and Mr. Stern is not on the call right now, but he is the biggest supporter probably statewide for broadband. So we experience that here on the Olympic in the Peninsula RTPO regularly. So again, we thank Jeremy for your time this morning, and Adrian for joining us. Much appreciate the presentation, and we also appreciate the opportunity to follow up with you with additional questions and comments. Okay.
Thanks so much.
And I'm sure that Thera will have your contact information out to all of us. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Moving on down the agenda, we have our annual biennial bylaw review, and want to just talk a little bit about this. We had a meeting with the subcommittee. We had invited particularly new people who were not involved with the original creation of the bylaws or update of the bylaws back in 2019. So anyway, those were the folks that were there with us. We talked about some housekeeping bylaw changes, which we'll let Thera talk about. And we also talked about a potential new policy for the RTPO. And the result of that meeting has brought us to what we believe is the need for a couple more subcommittees. We will try to make this work efficient and easy for everyone. But the one committee we would like is involving the new policy, or a policy about the letters of support that the RTPO authors for jurisdictions. And we've been doing this since 2019. We've been authoring letters of support for our jurisdictions for our members. Thera and I have used, Thera creates the letter and I approve it and sign it. We have used a foundation for these letters of support in that we write them only for members. And the project that we're offering the support for has to have gone either be in our tip or in the jurisdiction's tip. So it's gone through some sort of public process. What we have discovered recently is with more monies and different types of monies available, some non-members are seeking support from us, and they are partnering with our members for these grants. The case in point is the electrical vehicle grants that are out there, the EV grants that are out there. And we have 2 or 3 of our tribes and a couple of our jurisdictions are working with one energy provider for grants, and they would like a letter of support. So it brought the question to Thera and I, what would the requirements be for this type of letter? And so we went to this committee and said we would like to create this policy. There was a robust discussion at that particular committee meeting. And the conclusion was that we needed a subcommittee to work on this. So that's what we're asking for today. So I'm going to handle that a little different than the actual changes to bylaws, and I'll let Thera take that part. So anyone who would be interested in working on this letter of support policy, we'd appreciate it if you'd raise your hand. There are certain types of jurisdictions, our transit agencies seem to regularly ask for letters of support, as do many people. But we're hoping to get a cross-section of people on this subcommittee, both policymakers and technical folks, or people who write the grants or are involved with the execution of the grant application. So Randy, I see your hand raised. Do you have a comment?
Sorry, you asked me to raise my hand if I was interested in serving. That's what my hand raised was.
Okay. So Randy, if anyone's interested in serving, please raise your hand now or let myself or Thera know. And we won't go into this blind. We will at the meeting have some suggestions, some ideas that came out of the bylaw committee meeting, and some other things that have been brought up at the executive committee meeting. So we will offer ideas to get the conversation started. So again, we could sure use some help on creating this policy because we want to be very fair to everyone. So Leslie, are you raising your hand to be on the committee? Appreciate that. And what we will do, as I do regularly, is reach out to people who perhaps are not at our meeting today to see if they would be interested in serving. But our intent is to come back to you in August with a draft policy, and then have a discussion on it in August and bring it back in October for final approval. That is how we would like to see that move forward. So with that, Sarah, do you want to talk about the bylaw piece?
I can. Did you want to talk about the other subcommittee to talk about?
Well, yeah, we can talk about it. That has more to do with
the bylaws.
at
Okay.
our subcommittee
So,
meeting.
Sure.
Wendy Clark Getson was there, and she had brought up something specifically for our tribal members that would be a benefit or of interest to them. And we were hoping to get a subcommittee of our tribal members to review that before we bring it forward. And go ahead and talk about the rest of the
Sure.
the bylaw things.
Sure. Yeah. When the bylaws subcommittee met, there are some they identified some relatively small things, and they're included in the attachment highlighted. And when I say relatively small, they're important things worth addressing in the bylaws, but they're, you know, like if we capitalize cities and counties versus lowercase, that conveys a different meaning. And so there's a small handful of those that we will put together into a draft bylaws package, as well as any other changes that might be warranted as a result of looking at our membership language, how we address our tribal members and the process for them to become a member of PRTPO, an active member. We will look at those, and then any other recommendations that might come out of this other letter of support work, if by chance any changes to the bylaws are needed to accommodate whatever that subcommittee recommends. And we'll put together a draft package coming out of these different groups. Take it to Lisa Nickel, who is with Kitsap County. She is our legal counsel, just to make sure that we've not run afoul of state law or not introduced confusion into the bylaws that could be problematic in the future. And then the game plan is to come back to you in August with the actual strikeout, markup language of the proposed amendment package for you to review in August and comment on, and then we would bring it back to you for final approval in October. And so, yes, and so there would be these there's two different things. There are actually three different things sort of happening in parallel that will all come together for you in a single package to consider.
So we had two people raise their hand for the letter of support committee. Is there anyone else while we're still together? Otherwise, we will reach out to you individually to see if you would like to participate. And as a result,
yeah, I could reach out also. I think, and I know they've had to go on and off today a little bit, but I think I could just reach out directly to Tracy, Marty, and Wendy, and work with our tribal partners, and then also with Lower Elwha, Sklallam, and with the Makah to get some of our tribal member feedback on the language to bring that forward.
The other thing after we had this conversation at the subcommittee level about the level of support, these letters of support, it became apparent that not everyone on our board was aware we were writing these. Although we mentioned it almost regularly at every meeting, that if someone needs a letter of support, we're open for that. As a result of that, I have requested Thera to put the letters that we've written between meetings as part of our packet, so everyone is aware of the actions that we have taken. Okay, so I think we're good on that. We will come back with some actions, with some draft information for you in August, and we appreciate everyone who has so far indicated that they would like to help with that. Moving down the agenda, the next committee we're looking for, before we get to, there is a discussion, which I'm really looking forward to on the RTP, we're asking for committees today, 3 of them in a row. But this is the meeting where we typically ask for people who want to be involved in putting together our legislative outlook for the next year. We use this as a foundational piece and an educational piece with our state representatives and senators. And we have had success with this in the past. We've had a lot of, mainly I'm going to talk about the swap of federal funds, state funds for federal funds for STBG money. So we educate our legislators quite well through this process, and it's time to open that up again and decide what we want to highlight and what opportunities we want to provide them at this time. So again, this usually is a 2 or 3 meeting idea. We come back in August with some draft information, and we usually need this piece also finalized in October so that we're prepared for our legislative meetings that traditionally we try to do in November. So again, is there anyone who specifically wants to be on this committee? Michael Bateman, or anyone else? We've had some people who have been on this regularly. Some, it will be a new experience. But when I listened to Michael Bateman speak and have his question with Jeremy, I thought maybe state highways running through the middle of our cities and having developers, how can we get developers to contribute to the solutions of the additional traffic they create? That might be something that we'd want to bring up. So anyway, those are the types of things we talk about. And again, raise your hand or we will send out a generic. Lindsay, are you raising your hand or do you have a comment? Raising his hand. Perfect. Perfect.
I also have Wendy from that email before the meeting.
That's correct. Wendy has already raised her hand.
Yeah, it's a worthwhile, important endeavor, and it takes a little bit of thought and time, but it's totally worthwhile.
Yeah, yeah. And we're going to need more than 2, so we will send out invitations to everyone, and probably a doodle poll or whatever we call those to get on calendars. Yeah, this is one of the more important things we do every year, or we've had success. We've seen results from this activity, and we heard this past session how informed our legislators were on transportation issues, and they were giving credit to our RTPO for that. So, and we want to make sure everyone is well represented. So we will reach out and get an active group again this year. Thank you. So on down our agenda, we have, and we're just right on time. There's going to talk to us about the development of our regional transportation plan that we will be working on very diligently for the next 2 years. So Thera, we're going to give the meeting to you right now.
Super, thank you. And this is actually a really good, the earlier conversation was a good segue to this, the kinds of issues that you all have identified over the last 4 years as a part of your legislative outreach efforts are exactly the kind of big, gnarly regional issues that a regional transportation plan and that planning process can bring to light. And so this is sort of our last meeting with you, sort of in preparation for the RTP work that'll formally kick off in July. And what I wanted to talk with you about today is sort of the approach, how we're proposing to go about this, and get any feedback from you so that we can adjust as we need to before we get going. Because once we get going, as you will see, there's just a lot of different moving pieces that we need to make fit. I wanted, first, I just also want to clarify with you and give you a place to give you space to tell me you don't like this, but I'm referring to we approaching this RTP as sort of a team effort. It's the executive board, it's the technical advisory committee, and it's me and Ed as your staff. And all of us are going to play a lot of, we all have a lot to do in there. We're all going to play different roles. But I really just wanted to say what I'm about to talk with you about is I use this word we deliberately because yes, you are doing some things and they are doing some things and I am doing some things. And ideally they all come together so that 2 years from now, you are considering a draft plan for adoption. Now, what we're going to do, we don't have much money, and you have 12 meetings between now and then, as does the TAC. We're not planning on having a standing subcommittee with extra meetings. We don't have the budget for that. The other thing that's happening over this 2-year period is that most, if not all, of our local partners are updating their own local comprehensive plans. Everybody is going to be very, very busy. And so we're approaching this as an effort to demonstrate that a regional transportation plan can be updated, can be enhanced in terms of its usefulness, and not require a $250,000 separate standalone process that we can develop. We're going to try to build a plan that is integrated with the work program, that is useful, that hopefully the process is interesting, and that is easy to maintain over time, so that you can just integrate this into your work program going forwards and not have to sort of put the brakes on everything. So what I'm going to, I'm going to talk about the material that is in your packet, but I want to put it into a bigger context. And so if you'll bear with me for a brief presentation here, I just want to show you that what we're going to be doing with this RTP update, it's not the only thing you're going to be working on. So you will have all of the rest of your work program going on over these next 2 years. The legislative work group, policy development, we'll probably have a call for projects late this year for transportation alternatives. We've got RTIP developments and amendments, UPWP. We'll end up doing a consolidated grants call for projects. All of that stuff will be happening, and throughout it all, there will be a regional transportation plan being developed. What you have in your agenda packet is this sort of overview. I tried to put in one page, 2 years worth of work, both the board and the TAC, and a lot of stuff behind the scenes. I wanted to just take a couple of minutes and walk through this for you. These are the different parts of the planning process that you're going to engage in. And so the planning framework is something that we're really going to count on the board's guidance and leadership and direction on. This is the vision. This is the framework around which everything else will be built. You're going to define what this process is going to look like, how you're going to approach that. We will have milestones in your next meeting. You're going to be considering this public participation plan that'll direct how the work that we'll do with the community going forwards. You will have opportunity over the next few months, over your next few meetings, you'll be developing a draft vision, the strategy, and by April, you will have some draft goals and policies in place to help frame the work that we'll be doing. At the same time that you're doing that, the Technical Advisory Committee, which is going to be carrying a lot of heavy water too, is going to be leaning in with us on the technical aspects of it. The regional context part of this, I think, is, in terms of the public, is probably the most interesting part. It's where we get to tell the story about the region. What is it that makes the Peninsula region unique? And this is where we get to talk about the historical context, the accomplishments over the last 30 years of planning. And in fact, it was just about 30 years ago that Peninsula RTPO set off to develop its very first regional transportation plan, which was adopted in June of 1995. So this gives us a chance to tell that story and show the accomplishments over that time. It's also a chance to, and all of these are requirements, things that we have to do. It's also a chance to describe our regional transportation system. What goes into that system? What are the characteristics of that system? How is it used? These two pieces, this B and C, this regional context and the system inventory, is where we expect to lean heavily on our GIS services contract. And this is really where we're starting to build the guts of a dynamic story map plan that has information that we need, not just for the regional transportation plan, but also for other work that PRTPO does in our members. This is going to culminate in January of this upcoming year, and something that I'm going to try this language out and see if it works, a transportation atlas that the Technical Advisory Committee will forward on to the board for your consideration, comments, and hopefully ready, good enough for the public at that point as well. While that is going on, the board is still going to be very, very busy. And so while the TAC is working on some of the technical foundation, you're going to be springboarding off of the goals and policies, vision work to really start digging into what are the big regional issues that this plan should address. We expect in February that you'll have your first discussion on this. And between February and August of next year, you're going to develop sort of this framework of key issues and opportunities that the region should be considering and looking at. Within that time period, we'll also have our first sort of community engagement activity, which we'll talk about at your next meeting, the details of that. But that way, at this point in the community engagement process, we will have draft goals and policies, a draft vision, the story about the region to tell, and you will have identified what you think some of the key issues are that this plan should address. This is the foundation from which you're going to develop your recommendations. So you're going to say, these are the issues that we're seeing out there on the horizon. Your recommendations are going to, I think at this point, and this is something I'm looking for feedback on, but I think at this point, you're going to have sort of three kinds of recommendations. First is going to be a project list, and that is going to actually come to you from the TAC. The TAC is going to recommend a draft project list that we're suggesting should coincide with the regional tip. So that when we think about going forward, and I know we have questions to answer about the Kitsap members, but I think that we can address this over the next several months and figure out how it is that the regional tip list can be your near-term list of regional projects for the transportation plan. You'll also have a strategic action plan that you'll be working on over this next year that, again, when I said that in the legislative work group, you all are often identifying problems and sort of saying, we think this is what needs to be done. That's going to be similar to what you're going to be doing in the action plan of the big issues that this region needs to address. It's not so much that you're going to have the answers for them. If you do, great. But you're also more likely to be saying to the community through this planning process that these are the priority concerns of the Peninsula region, who needs to be involved in, and kind of what needs to be done. And then the last piece of this recommendation package, I think, is going to be your a recommended approach for how to manage ongoing coordination and consistency. The RTP is required to do a consistency review. What that means today is different than what it meant 30 years ago. And we think that working with the Technical Advisory Committee, because they have their fingers on the pulse of what's going on at that local comprehensive plan update level at the local agencies, would be a great resource for helping us develop a meaningful consistency review process that is not cumbersome, that is no more complicated than it needs to be, but actually adds value. So that's what we see coming out on recommendations. There'll all be a regional, a draft regional transportation plan that's going to come together. You know, most of that, it looks like there's, most of the effort is on this end, but as you can see, we're hoping to build this in pieces as we go along so that next year, you will be able to recommend a draft plan for public review. We will then go out, talk about it with the public, talk about the, what the plan entails. This the second of the two big events. This will lead right into, and we'll have the details for you at your next meeting. This will lead right into the formal comment period on the draft plan. And then what we believe is that in April of 2025, the board will be able to give the TAC and the staff direction as to what changes based on what you've heard now. What changes would you like to see made to the draft plan? That will give us 2 months to work with the TAC and ideally get a recommendation from the TAC in May of 2025 and come back to you in June of 2025 with a plan that you will be able to adopt and move into implementation. So I wanted to share that with you. I know that there's just a lot of different pieces out there. And that would be true whether you had $250,000 and 4 or 5 years to do it, or if you have $30,000 and need to do it in 2 years. But I think that we can come up with a process that's sustainable, that doesn't wear you out, doesn't wear your staff out, along the way. Hopefully gives you something to look forward to at each meeting. You will have this on your agenda every single meeting between now and June 2025, some aspect of the plan update. At key points throughout the way, the TAC is handing something off to the board, and the board is handing something off to the TAC. And you know, if it miraculously works out without any hiccups along the way, this time next year, I'll be briefing you on your final draft plan to review and approve. So with that, what I would like to do is hear from you, any questions that you have, any concerns, if you have an issue with the way that we're sort of thinking that the board is going to be the lead on the policy, strategic development aspects with input from the TAC, and the TAC kind of being the lead with staff on the technical foundation with input from the board. I want to make sure you're comfortable with that before we take a work plan to the TAC at their next meeting. And also want to hear any thoughts you might have about engagement. This suggests 2 primary outreach opportunities. It will be virtual. That's the nature of our world and our budget, but that does not mean it is a substandard process, and does not mean that we'll not have a lot of rich opportunity for engagement. So with that, I'll stop talking and hear what you have to say and what your thoughts are about this.
What my big takeaway from what Thera said is the board is going to be actively engaged in the policy decisions that will be going into this RTP. So as she said, hopefully we'll have some robust discussions, and during our executive board meetings, it's going to be real important that we're all engaged in those executive board meetings. I find the timeline ambitious, but I do believe that we can efficiently do this. And again, I thank the board for allowing us to buy the extra 30 hours of GIS time, because I believe moving forward that will be important to create the plan and to keep the plan updated. Is there anyone else who has any comments or concerns about the timeline or the engagement of the board or the engagement of the TAC? Well, I'm not seeing any. So with that, thank you, Thera.
Sure. And if I could, Beck, I'll just also, please don't ever hesitate. There's no way that these 12 meetings for the board and the 12 meetings for the TAC could possibly accommodate the kind of questions or coordination. So just know that there's an open line of communication anytime if you want to bounce ideas, or if you're wondering how does this fit. But starting at your next meeting, we'll go through the formal, here's what your requirements are, here, you know, so it'll start falling into place. And this was the background we needed to do. Thank you.
I also believe that we'll also see how our other committees thinking in terms of the Transportation Outlook Committee, how it all blends together and works together, that none of those things are done in isolation. So with that, our next agenda item is the coordinators report. Are you ready to keep talking, Thera?
I am, and I actually owe everybody an apology. I just recently gotten some funding information for some port projects, and so I held sending the coordinators report until I could integrate that in, and I realized last night as I was prepping for this, I never sent that out, and there's actually more funding information I want to include now. So after the meeting, I will send that out this afternoon. I will say by the end of June, we're going to have a new web page on our website just with funding information. I've been working in the funding arena for a very long time. I've never seen anything like what's going down right now, and I cannot imagine for all of our local partners how you are trying to make sense of this. So I've come across some good tools, some good resources, and what we're going to try to do as a service, because the coordinator reports only come out every 2 months, we're going to try to keep an active funding opportunities page current on the website, just to help you and your staff and your colleagues navigate some of these funding programs, So I will have that up there. And then the other thing I would call to your attention that is in that coordinator's report that you did not receive is I'm also interested in hearing how the webinar format invitation that you all receive, how that is working. And I know that a couple of folks you have to take an extra step to get it on your appointment calendar. I have a workaround for those for whom that is problematic. And so I just offer that out there to you. If you have been having challenges with trying to keep track of your executive board calendar appointments and agenda packets and all of that, I think I have a workaround. The webinar format has been good for us for many practical administrative reasons, but it does and I appreciate this very much, it's got to be frustrating. It does create some more challenges on your end. And so whatever we can do to alleviate that, we would like to do that. So that's really, there's just a remarkable amount of funding opportunity and tools to access those funds coming at you right now. So that would be the main thing I would share. And then also, as Beck pointed out, I would share with you also that at the bottom of your agenda and at the very end of your agenda packet are all the letters of support that PRTPO has written this calendar year. And from this point on, we will just include those. It makes perfect sense. Negligent on my part to have not thought of that earlier. We'll just include that as an informational attachment for you so that you can know what PRTPO has endorsed in terms of projects.
I don't think you can characterize that as negligent there. I think that's just something that for all of us, like, oh yeah, probably should have done that. Makes perfect sense. Yeah, negligent is not the right word.
Okay. Well, thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Michael. I am not seeing any public.
We have had nobody in our meeting room, in our general meeting room. We have no attendees.
Okay, but even with that, I will open up the meeting for public comment. And then knowing that there's no one in our general meeting room, I will close the public comment period. And open it up to any member updates that anyone would like to share about the work they're doing, much as Ed Stern got to go first because he had to leave. So he got us up to date on what Paul's supposed to doing. So is there anything else people would like to share with their jurisdictions? We're not a real chatty bunch this morning.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah. So oh, Marty, thank you.
I'll share. I did our bid opening for the Safe Route to School project to do that small section of sidewalk along Highway 106 on Reservation Road also. And then connect to existing where existing sidewalk is on Reservation Road. So we have a parent low bidder and I'm ready to write up a contract for that project and everything's going good. So I just wanted to share that with you guys.
Yeah, that's great news.
Another section, another section of safe place for the kids to walk when they're coming home or going to school. A lot of kids like to bike or walk to school from the reservation, so it'll help.
How'd those bids come in for you, Marty? Did you get halfway decent pricing?
Yeah, we got a pretty good bid. It was actually really close. Actually, it was the lowest bid was the same as the SCJ's what they estimated for the project.
Excellent.
Fantastic.
That was crazy. I'd never seen that happen in my life. I couldn't believe that happened. They got to do the exact penny is what SCJ did.
Oh, wow. Yeah, lately it's been the other way. It's been, the bids are coming in like half again as much as you anticipate, and we're all scrambling for how to figure out how to pay for stuff.
Yeah, and all the bids came in like the same day it was closing.
Yeah.
It was crazy.
Congratulations, man. That's awesome.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who has something to share? Seeing none, I will adjourn the meeting and we'll see everyone in August. And please expect communications from us on the Transportation Outlook Committee and the Letter of Support Committee. And also the tribe Sarah will reach out on the bylaws. So with that, I hope everyone has a great weekend and a good summer. We'll see you in August.
Great to see you
Bye,
all.
everybody.
Thank you, everybody. Bye.
Bye.